I moved to this rural neighborhood specifically because of the freedom to farm. My little plot of land was perfect open fields, a red barn, and 6 lively goats that were more like family than livestock. Everyone around here had something: chickens, cows, even a couple of alpacas down the road. It was part of the lifestyle, but then the HOA president who moved in from the city just 3 months ago sent me a letter. It said my goats were against community guidelines, and if I didn't remove them in 10 days, I'd face daily fines. Mind you, this is a farming community. People drive tractors to the store, so I did what any stubborn farm kid would do. I stood my ground. But the way this escalated, no one saw that coming. Before I dive into the full mess, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss how it all played out. Tit gets wild. Asterisk, I'd always wanted a quiet, rural life, nothing flashy, just good soil, wide skies, and a small herd of goats to keep me company and provide fresh milk. After years of saving, I bought a modest house on 3 acres in a farming community known for its independence and self-reliance. Out here, people waved when they passed, swapped tools without asking, and nobody cared if you wore muddy boots to the grocery store. I moved in with my goats, 6 of them, all named, all spoiled, and Junebug, who liked jumping on my pickup's hood for no reason at all. They weren't just animals. They were part of the rhythm of my life: morning feedings, midday grazing, evening milking. My neighbors would occasionally stop by to chat and leave with a bottle of goat milk or some cheese. Love them. That's why I nearly snorted coffee out of my nose. The morning I opened the envelope, it was from the HOA. I hadn't had much interaction with them yet. Repainting my mailbox a uniform taupe. I thought it was a joke, but the letter wasn't funny. Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that livestock, specifically goats, are being kept on your property. Please remove all goats within 10 days to avoid a daily fine of $150. I reread it 3 times. Then I laughed. Goats not allowed in a farming community. That was like banning surfboards in a beach town. I called up my neighbor Terry, who kept chickens and a loud donkey named Carl. He laughed too. That's rich, he said. These clowns move out here and think they can turn a farm town into a golf resort. At first, I didn't even take it seriously. I figured it was some misunderstanding. Maybe the new HOA president didn't understand how things worked here. After all, most of us had animals. I assumed a quick chat would clear it up. A few days later, I walked down to the HOA office. A double-wide trailer near the front of the development and knocked on the door. The new president, Linda, answered. Tall, sharp suit, nails too clean for someone living in the country. She gave me a tight smile. Yes. I got this letter, I said, holding it up. About my goats. Yes, we've had some complaints. From who? I'm not at liberty to say, she replied, but the covenant is very clear. Everyone has something: pigs, chickens, goats, you name it. Linda crossed her arms. That may have been the case before, but we're working to raise the standards of the neighborhood. Livestock lowers property values. That's when I realized this wasn't about the goats. This was about someone trying to reshape the entire neighborhood to fit a picture they brought from the suburbs. And I wasn't the only one in their crosshairs. I stood there for a moment, stunned. You moved out here, and now you want to change everything that makes this place what it is. Linda didn't flinch. We're simply enforcing the rules. If you don't like it, you're welcome to appeal at the next HOA meeting. She closed the door in my face. I walked home, not laughing anymore. I dug through the HOA covenant documents, trying to find anything that supported their claim. Section 14B was vague, mentioning livestock, but not defining what counted, nor acknowledging that many properties here were zoned agricultural before the HOA was even formed. Then I called around. My neighbor 3 doors down had goats. The retired Couple next to me had 2 cows. Someone else had chickens, ducks, even a few peacocks. None of them had gotten letters, so why me? That's when it clicked. Linda didn't like that I was visible. My goats roamed the front half-acre. They were clean, well-behaved, but undeniably present. I wasn't. Just breaking her made-up rules, I was breaking her illusion. But if she thought I'd roll over and give up my herd, she had no idea who she was messing with. The next day, I made a plan. It topped with evidence, pressure, and a little community support. I wasn't the only one with livestock. And if they started with me, everyone else would be next. I walked into the feed store that afternoon and told the regulars what happened. People were shocked, then angry. Linda behind it. Everyone nodded knowingly. Apparently, she'd already started suggesting people switch from wooden fences to vinyl ones, ban wind chimes, and even complained about someone's tractor being parked too visibly in their driveway. "This ain't the suburbs," one old-timer said. "We got enough space between us for a reason." By the end of the week, I had a plan, a few allies, and some very unexpected support, including. Worse, I knew I had a fight on my hands, but I wasn't backing down. I figured once the HOA realized I wasn't going to quietly give up my goats, they'd back off. Maybe see the backlash brewing and try to settle things reasonably. I was wrong. A few days after, I walked into Linda's office. I got another letter, this time delivered by hand. Same tone, same nonsense. Due to your non-compliance with the covenant terms outlined in Section 14B, daily fines will begin accruing at $150 per day, effective immediately. The letter also included a line that got under my skin. Further failure to comply may result in legal escalation. They wanted a fight, so I gave them one. I wasn't just going to argue back, I was going to expose how ridiculous their enforcement was. First, I spent an entire afternoon documenting everything. I took photos of my goats healthy, quiet. Not a nuisance, and I recorded a video showing my property. How far it was from the nearest neighbor and how clean everything was. You could eat off my barn floor. I even included footage of the zoning map, which clearly showed my property and 5 others were zoned for agricultural use before the HOA even existed. Then I made a call to the county zoning office. I explained the situation and asked them flat out, "Can the HOA override existing agricultural zoning?" The official chuckled. "Absolutely not. If your property is zoned ag and there are no county-level restrictions, the HOA can't supersede that. Their rules only apply within the scope of the governing documents, and they can't violate local or state law." That was the ammo I needed. But I wasn't done. I printed copies of everything my property zoning, vague HOA clause, the photos, and slipped them into a binder. I titled it Goat Case File. Dramatic, sure. But this wasn't just about goats anymore. This was about someone trying to erase what this community was built on. Then I went neighbor to neighbor. I knocked on every door within a mile radius, explained what happened, showed them the binder. Most people were appalled. One guy laughed and said, "I've got 3 pigs in my backyard. She gonna send animal control after me next?" Almost. Every person I talked to signed a letter of support that I put together. It wasn't official, but it carried weight. We, the undersigned residents of community name, support the continued presence of livestock, including goats, on properties zoned for agricultural use. We believe the HOA should respect the rural character and original intent of this community. Within 48 hours, I had 26 signatures. Even folks who didn't keep animals wanted the HOA to back off. If they get away with this, what's next? One woman said, "No hanging laundry outside. No vegetable gardens." But Linda didn't budge. She held another HOA meeting, this time conveniently not announced in the newsletter, and tried to pass a motion to redefine livestock as prohibited on any visible portion of residential lots. They were trying to rewrite the rules to suit themselves. Fortunately, one of the board members, a soft-spoken retired farmer named George, stood up and said, "Linda, this isn't what the community agreed to. We didn't move out here too. Pretend we're in a suburb. You're out of line." I was sitting in the back row, binder on my lap. Trying not to grin, Linda was losing control of the room. Still, she tried to rally her little group of rule followers. At one point, she even suggested my goats were aggressive. I nearly laughed out loud. Junebug once got headbutted by a chicken Dot to keep things civil. I raised my hand and spoke. I told the room everything. My zoning, my quiet, clean goats. My right to farm, and how dangerous it was to let the HOA push people around based on personal preference. Then, I opened the binder and laid it on the table in front of the board. This isn't about goats. This is about someone trying to change the soul of this place. If we let this happen, we lose what makes this community special. Some people clapped, others nodded. Linda sat stone-faced. After the meeting, people came up to me. They shared their own stories. One guy said Linda threatened him over leaving a fishing boat in his driveway too long. Another said she was told to remove a tire swing because it violated aesthetic harmony. I realized it wasn't just about enforcement. It was about control, and I wasn't the only one ready to push back. That week, I kept receiving the fines daily, like clockwork. I pinned them on my fridge like war trophies. I also filed an official challenge with the county mediation office, citing the agricultural zoning protections and including the HOA letters as evidence. They told me it would take a couple of weeks to process, but based on what I had, they didn't expect the HOA to come out on top. Meanwhile, I stayed loud. I went on the local Facebook group and shared my story. I posted pictures of Butterbean chewing on a towel, captioned, "The face of criminal livestock behavior." People loved it. I got flooded with comments like, "Linda's out of her mind. We support you. Goats forever. Time to vote these clowns out." That's when an idea hit me. What if I didn't fight this alone? What if I made this a movement? I started planning something bigger. A peaceful, very goat-filled protest. A demonstration of community values. If Linda and the HOA wanted to pretend livestock were the enemy, I'd give them a visual they wouldn't forget. But that's for the next part of the story. It started with a joke. One night, after posting a photo of my goats lounging peacefully under a maple tree with the caption "Still illegal," apparently, someone commented, "We should all bring our goats to the HOA office and see how they like it." That comment got over 100 likes. A few more people chimed in with laughing emojis and goat memes. But then someone else wrote, "No, really. Let's do it. Go team." And that was it. The idea was born. Within 48 hours, my inbox was flooded with messages from neighbors, some I knew, some I didn't, asking when and where we'd do it. I thought maybe 5 or 6 people would show up. I'd figured a handful of goats tethered politely in front of the HOA trailer would send a strong message, but I underestimated just how fed up people were. It turns out I wasn't the only one who'd received threatening letters or ridiculous compliance notices. There was the woman who got fined for having a wooden porch swing, the guy told to remove a handmade birdhouse, a veteran who'd been scolded for flying 2 flags instead of 1. Everyone had a story, and everyone was ready to push back. We picked a Saturday morning, called it the Rural Rights Rally. I printed flyers. A local feed store put one up on their bulletin board, and people started tagging each other online, reposting pictures of their animals, and calling them HOA outlaws. By Friday night, I had no idea how big it was going to be, but I did know it was bigger than me. Saturday came, and I woke up early. The sun was barely up, but Butterbean and Junebug were already stomping around excitedly, like they knew something What's going on? I brushed them down, gave them their morning feed, and then gently loaded them into the trailer. I didn't dress up fancy, just jeans, boots, and a t-shirt that said Goats Before HOA. It was a last-minute gift from a neighbor's daughter, who had started screen printing shirts just for the event. As I drove toward the HOA trailer, I turned the corner and slowed to a crawl. There were already dozens of people there, and not just standing around. They brought their animals. I saw goats in wagons, goats in baby carriers, goats wearing signs like, "Legal resident. Don't blame me, just chew grass." Not a threat to your vinyl siding, but it wasn't. Just goats. Someone brought a pony. Someone else had a few chickens in a dog crate. A couple rolled up with ducks in a kiddie pool. There was even a guy with a pet pig on a leash wearing sunglasses. The atmosphere wasn't angry, was festive. Like a weird rural block party with signs, banners, and tons of laughter. Kids ran around petting animals. Neighbors who'd never met were shaking hands and trading stories about ridiculous HOA demands. I parked, unloaded my goats, and led them up to the front lawn of the HOA trailer, where a small wooden podium stood empty. Linda wasn't there yet, but when she finally arrived, late. Of course, she pulled up in her shiny SUV and stopped cold. Her face said everything. She didn't get out of the car for a full 2 minutes. When she finally did, she stepped out in heels, a clipboard in one hand and a look of pure disbelief on her face. She tried to act calm. "Please disperse," she said, addressing no one in particular. "This is not an authorized assembly." No one moved. A few people just started clapping slowly. Someone in the back yelled, "We're just out here enjoying our livestock." Then George, the older board member who'd stood up to her at the last meeting, walked up to her. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just handed her a folder and said, "These are signatures from 42 households supporting the right to keep animals. You're outnumbered, Linda." She didn't take it. Instead, she pointed at my goats. "That's still a violation. You're all in violation." That's when I stepped forward. I didn't yell either. I just said, "Linda, my land is legally zoned agricultural. The HOA cannot override that. And you've been selectively enforcing rules based on personal bias." I held up my binder again, the goat case file, now with even more printouts, including a copy of the county zoning office's written statement supporting my position. "Try to fine me all you want, but I'm not paying it. And if you want to escalate this to court, you're going to lose. Not just this case, your position. Because people around here are tired of being pushed around." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, someone turned on a portable speaker and country music started blasting. Kids laughed. A dog barked. Butterbean bleated. She realized she'd lost control of the moment. And then something amazing happened. One by one, people began walking up to the front of the lawn, each with a small printed sign or letter. Some were handwritten, others were printed and signed. They started laying them down at her feet, letters of support, protest, documentation of past HOA harassment. She stood there, overwhelmed, drowning in paper and goat bleats. Eventually, she turned and walked back to her car without saying another word. The crowd erupted in cheers. I stayed until the very end, helping clean up and making sure no animals left any presents behind. But the message was clear. This was more than a rally. It was a reckoning. We weren't just standing up for goats. We were standing up for community, for common sense, and for the right to live without being micromanaged into submission. And I wasn't done yet. The next step, making sure these ridiculous fines were erased and this power-hungry board got a major reset. 2 days after the goat rally, I checked my mailbox and, sure enough, there it was. Another fine notice, same formatting, same smug tone. As of this notice, unpaid fines now totaled $2,100. Immediate action is required to avoid legal recourse. I laughed out loud. It was almost impressive how oblivious Linda and her board were. After getting publicly embarrassed by half the community and having literal goats chew grass in front of their office, they still thought a piece of paper with a $sign on it would scare me. It didn't. I didn't rip it up, though. I added it to the goat case file. At this point, that binder was basically a Nova letters, zoning maps, signed petitions, HOA screenshots, and even photos from the rally. Someone had taken a great shot of Butterbean staring directly into the camera with a freedom sign around her neck. But what really sealed it was the letter I'd received from the county zoning appeals office just the day before. We have reviewed your submission, supporting documents, and community petitions based on the agricultural zoning of your property and the lack of legal law authority demonstrated by the HOA. We find your livestock use compliant with local regulations. HOA fines in conflict with zoning protections may be challenged and voided through civil court. I had the green light, so I filed. It wasn't about the money, it was the principle. One submitted a small claims case through the county courthouse to have the fines declared invalid and to seek reimbursement for legal fees, along with a cease and desist against the HOA for further action regarding my goats. Word spread fast. People were giddy. "You're really taking them to court?" One guy asked me at the feed store. "You bet," I said. "I'm not letting them rewrite the rules just because my animals don't fit their postcard vision." George, the board member who had supported me from the start, pulled me aside one day. "You know, the community's behind you. Win or lose, this changes things." That stuck with me, because I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who'd ever been threatened, fined, or silenced over something petty. 2 weeks later, we went to court. The hearing was in a small county courtroom, nothing flashy. Just a judge, a clerk, and a few rows of pew-like benches. I showed up with my binder and a handful of neighbors who wanted to show support. Linda arrived with one of the other board members and a lawyer in a stiff gray suit who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The judge called the case, and I stepped forward. My argument was simple and clear. My land is agriculturally zoned. The HOA was formed after my property was already established as suitable for livestock. The covenant clause they cited was vague, inconsistently enforced, and directly contradicted local zoning law. Their fines had no legal standing, and their threats amounted to harassment. The judge asked questions. I had answers. Even showed a photo of the original property listing I bought the land from with perfect 4 goats. In bold lettering, Linda's lawyer tried to argue that the community was evolving and needed to enforce standards for the sake of resale, value, and aesthetic uniformity. He cited cases from other communities where HOAs successfully restricted livestock, but the judge wasn't buying it. He looked at Linda and said, "Ma'am, your community is located in a county whose ordinances permit livestock on agricultural properties. You can't enforce restrictions that violate county law. And from what I see here, this homeowner has been targeted unfairly." He paused, then added, "Also, $150 per day for keeping well-behaved goats in a farming community. That's absurd." Verdict: fines nullified. HOA ordered to cease further action unless new bylaws were properly drafted. Passed and applied evenly and legally with full community vote. Linda didn't say a word as the judge read the decision. But as I walked out, people in the courtroom clapped. I stood outside for a minute with Butterbean's photo in my hand. Yep, I brought it, just smiling. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was a community one, and it set something in motion. The next HOA meeting was a full house. People showed up who hadn't attended a meeting in years. George stood up and proposed an official vote of no confidence. In the current leadership, the motion passed, loudly Linda and two other board members resigned that night. And guess who the community elected as interim board chair? George. And guess who he asked to be part of the zoning and policy committee? Me. Didn't want power, but I did want fairness. And it felt good knowing that the community trusted me to help keep things that way. Over the next few weeks, we rewrote some of the outdated HOA guidelines. We clarified livestock rules based on zoning. We made sure no one could be punished based on one person's aesthetic preferences. And we built in protections for future residents who wanted to live simply, whether that meant raising goats, growing tomatoes, or parking a tractor in the driveway. As for my goats, they are still here, still grazing, still part of the land. The daily fines stopped, the threats stopped, and a lot of people who once stayed quiet started speaking up. It was like the spell had broken. The HOA wasn't a mysterious force anymore. It was just people. And now it was people who actually listened. The funniest part? Butterbean became kind of a local legend. Someone made a little wooden sign near the neighborhood entrance that said, "Home of the Free. Thanks, Butterbean." After everything that went down, the fines, the rally, a court, Cassio'd think I'd want nothing to do with the HOA ever again. But something changed after the dust settled. For the first time, the HOA wasn't acting like some power-hungry shadow council. It became a group of neighbors trying to solve real problems, without turning every disagreement into a $150 a day penalty. The new board, led by George, actually invited discussion instead of shutting it down. And the goats, they became local mascots. People would walk by and wave. Some brought their kids over just to meet Butterbean and Junebug. A teacher even asked if she could bring a few students for a rural education day. I figured, why not? I gave a little tour, showed them how we cared for the goats, and talked about how food doesn't just show up in stores. It starts in places like this. It hit me during one of those little visits. The thing the old HOA feared. Most livestock dirt. Life was the very thing that brought the neighborhood together. Goats weren't the problem. The problem had always been this unspoken pressure to sanitize the community, to turn a once brown farming area into a knockoff suburb where everything had to be beige, identical, and silent. That pressure didn't come from the land. It came from a mindset of belief that neatness was more important than neighbors, or that rules mattered more than reason. But that mindset cracked when Linda resigned, and in the months that followed, the new board started making real progress. We hosted a community values revote, where residents could actually weigh in on what the neighborhood should be about, not what the HOA handbook said, but what the people said. We asked questions like, should livestock be allowed on agricultural zoned lots? 92% said yes. Should residents be allowed to grow food gardens in front yards? 85% said yes, should. Holiday decorations be allowed for more than 14 days? Unanimous, yes. Should the HOA be able to issue fines without a hearing or warning? Absolutely not. It was like watching color return to a black and white. Neighborhood, I got to be part of the new committee that rewrote the bylaws. We made sure everything was clear, fair, and rooted in the values of the actual people living here, not just one person's interpretation of aesthetic harmony. One of my favorite changes. We created a clause specifically protecting traditional agricultural practices, which includes livestock, crop cultivation, and the use of farming equipment. It even had a nickname in the doc, the Butterbean Clause. The goats themselves started drawing visitors from neighboring areas. It was funny, people would come take selfies next to the sign that said Home of the Free, thanks to Butterbean. Someone made a sticker version of it and handed them out at the farmer's market. But here's the best part, Linda. She didn't move away. At first, I assumed she'd pack up and sell the moment she lost her grip on the community. But she stayed. Quietly, awkwardly, but she stayed. One afternoon, I saw her at the local nursery. She avoided eye contact at first, but I walked over and said, "Hey." She looked up, and to my surprise, she didn't seem angry. "I was wrong," she said softly. "I thought I was protecting the community, but I wasn't listening to it." Nodded. We all want the place to thrive. We just disagreed on what that meant. There wasn't some huge reconciliation moment. No tearful apology. But we left that conversation with mutual respect. And a few weeks later, she showed up to a community potluck with a tray of lemon bars. She even complimented Butterbeans. Little red collar, so yeah, things changed now. Our HOA meetings are filled with laughter and actual progress. We discuss irrigation issues, volunteer landscaping days, even ways to support local agriculture. People who used to be afraid of speaking up now help shape decisions, and we've had no major conflicts since. Honestly, I think people just needed to feel heard. Once they stopped pushing back and started pitching in. It's amazing. What happens when power isn't hoarded but shared? As for me, I still raise goats, still tend my land, and now I help others who want to start gardens, keep hens, or install rainwater systems. We're not perfect, but we're finally living the life we moved out here to find. A life where land still means something, where neighbors look out for each other, where goats are welcome, and so is common sense. So if you're watching this thinking, "That would never happen where I live," just remember, it starts with one person saying no. One person asking a question. One binder full of zoning maps and a goat named Butterbean. The HOA tried to ban goats in a farming community. Now they're helping protect them.